Okay, I think we said about 15 minutes, so for everyone there at home, we'll keep that. Let's talk FEMA appeals. This is what a determination letter looks like, minus the redacted pieces. It essentially says, dear survivor, FEMA's reviewed your disaster assistance, your appeal for disaster assistance. FEMA is not a substitute for insurance, can't cover all losses covered by the disaster, gives explanation. But then, what you see right here in bold, minus the redacted pieces, is assistance not approved and ineligible, the home is safe to occupy. Now, if you were like me, I look at bold quicker than anything else, right? And if you're a survivor who's high stressed, very marginalized, highly vulnerable, you're going to see that, and the greater likelihood than not is that you're going to just give up. You're going to say, well, it's big and bold saying, I am not approved for assistance. Then you may throw the whole thing in the trash and try to figure things out on your own. These determination letters are not set in stone final. They are conversation starters. But again, if you're a survivor, someone like I would assume I would be if I didn't know all things FEMA, see this, I'd say, forget it. I would not read to page 3, where it says, if you do not agree with anything written in here, appeal, and here is how you can appeal. So you as survivor advocates, please tell your survivors, don't give up. Just because FEMA said no, or just because you received a low award amount, does not mean that is all you are eligible for. Okay? I also want to make some things clear. And I'm going to use, both Robin and I have been in Kentucky. I've been in Kentucky many times, but not as long as Robin has been in there. And when I was out there, FEMA was sending determination letters for $197.87, saying, you have been approved for home repair assistance for $197 or 100 whatever dollars, right? I was like, what the hell? Excuse my language. But what are they doing? That's a slap in the face. So I made a whole bunch of calls saying, what's going on? And I was told by FEMA, oh, wait, that is for contractor repair estimates. But again, determination letters are blanket forms that were pre-filled in. And the only thing that changes is award amounts and what the determination is, right? So there's no clear explanation as to why. So I'm on the phone with partner organizations. I'm on radio. I'm on everything. I'm reaching out to local and national representatives. And when McConnell's office heard about it, they looped in FEMA, and then FEMA started sending up follow-up letters after that, explaining what the $197 was. Okay? I'm giving this as an example because it really highlights that these forms are blanket forms. And you really need to connect with FEMA to understand what's going on. Additionally, with personal property, love this. You're going to get a determination letter. If you're awarded personal property funds, it will not tell you what those funds were specifically allocated for. Say you lost your refrigerator, your washer dryer, your sofa, your bed, these essential items. FEMA can give you some funds, but they won't tell you exactly what it's supposed to cover. So then when you appeal, you're not sure what was covered or not. So you can request your entire case file from FEMA. and get that information, or as a survivor, try to call FEMA and see if they're willing to provide you with the line items of what they've already covered, right? Okay.
From the inspector's report.
From the inspector's report. Yes, from the inspector's report. Okay, so now that you are familiar with the determination letter, let's talk about the types of ineligibility that are possible. These are the most common. I'm not going through all of them. There are so many different types of ineligibility, but these are some common ones, right? That's ownership not being verified, occupancy not being verified. This is very common. When you're in the midst of a disaster, you're applying to FEMA. More often than not, you are trying to get things done as quickly as possible. And it is so easy for you to forget to add documents, or it is so easy for you not to have documents available. In the fires, you might not think, in my emergency roller bag, let me make sure I have a proof of occupancy and proof of ownership document with me, right? So it might take some time after the fact to collect these documents. So that's one major cause of ineligibility. And in order to receive FEMA assistance, you will need to prove ownership and/or occupancy through those documents listed in your packet. There's also the possibility of failed identity verification. Again, FEMA wants to know for sure you are who you say you are, so you need to provide them with different forms of ID. Okay? We've talked a little bit about insurance. Let's talk a little bit more about insurance. So, FEMA wants to know if you are insured. FEMA wants to know what the coverage was. So if you state you are insured, let's say you have homeowners insurance, but let's talk about these winter storms, right? You have homeowners insurance, but you do not have flood insurance. You still state that you have homeowners insurance. You know 100% after Angela's training that homeowners insurance is not going to cover floods, but you still need to apply or file a claim with your homeowners insurance no matter what to show FEMA that you were denied homeowners, right? So what FEMA needs in every appeal, or in an appeal, if it says you are insured or ineligible because of insurance, you need to send FEMA your determination page, or excuse me, your declaration page of your insurance. Declaration page, which lists out what items you are covered for. If you were denied, also send in a denial letter. If you were approved, send in a settlement statement which identifies what you're being covered for in insurance and what the coverage costs are. If possible, send in a receipt or a stub of that insurance check, right? So that FEMA can see that. These items are vital for the appeal, right? Because FEMA wants to know what was covered, what was not covered, so that they can understand if they can provide additional assistance. Okay, again, we've spoken about SBA a number of times, but I'm going to state it one more time. If you were referred over to the SBA, apply immediately. If you were denied an SBA loan, but it was not reflected in FEMA's system, go to SBA. Tell them to work their magic. If the SBA says you're withdrawn, send them all documentation you can, the SBA, send it to the SBA, proving what your income is. Try to get it reconsidered. Again, FEMA will not process personal property, transportation, and group flood insurance claims or assistance unless you were denied an SBA loan if FEMA had referred you over to the SBA, okay? And lastly, and this is important on all appeals, substantiation. You need to prove through documentation what you are requesting and claiming inside the letter, okay? So it could be that FEMA says, our inspector went out there and they saw no damage. And you need to say, well, that's incorrect. I had all this damage, right? How are you going to prove that there was all this damage? Through contractor estimates, and the contractors can directly correlate the damage caused by the disaster. Okay? All right. Now, this is flood insurance. Let's talk about flood insurance for a second. Let's talk about determination letters where determinations have been made in which you have received funding, but there's a new contingency that says, we realize that you are in a flood zone. And from this point forward, we're giving you, this survivor received $12,000. We're giving you $12,000 for your home repair, but you now have a flood insurance requirement. This flood insurance requirement means it is your responsibility, if you do not receive group flood insurance from FEMA, to obtain and maintain insurance. And if you do receive group flood insurance from FEMA, that once that group flood insurance policy, the free payments that FEMA's been making for up to 3 years, ends, it is your responsibility to maintain that flood insurance. Because in the next flood-related disaster, if you do not have flood insurance, and you have that flood insurance requirement placed on your property, FEMA will not assist you. Okay? So this flood insurance requirement stays with the property. Is California a disclosure state? A disclosure state when you're selling a home?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Florida's not, which I think is horrible.
Oh, yeah, this is California.
Yeah,
Disclosure.
yeah. So thankfully, in a disclosure state, the seller has to disclose that there is a flood insurance requirement placed on the property. Not every state's like that, like I just stated in Florida. Sellers can sell the property without disclosing that FEMA placed this requirement on there. So I have worked with many survivors, Florida and Kentucky. I've met with survivors in Kentucky who've purchased homes. Again, this requirement stays with the property. It does not stay with the survivor. Who have purchased homes that have had this flood insurance requirement placed on there, and they didn't know it. And then a flood-related disaster occurred, and they did not have insurance, and FEMA said, sorry, you are NFIP non-compliant, which means National Flood Insurance Policy non-compliant. You did not have the flood insurance you needed in order to receive FEMA assistance. So please do your due diligence when purchasing a home outside of the state of California, but still, you want to hope that even though this is a disclosure state, it's actually being disclosed, that the home you're buying, whether or not it has NFIP requirement, that National Flood Insurance requirement. Okay, so go ahead.
Do real estate agents ever disclose that kind of a thing, even if it's non-disclosure?
No, it's, I can speak to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be happy. Oh, hi, two of them.
Gotta turn this one on.
I got a lot to say, huh?
Are real estate agents required or able to disclose that information?
If the real estate agent knows, but if you go for a loan, the loan people will definitely ask for it, because you can't have a loan without it if it's required. And as far as the broker, the only he or she can do is disclose what they know. So if you don't know it, you can't disclose it. However, after you close it and you say you should have told me, then you have sort of a litigation thing going on at that point, or mediation. So anyway, if we know it, we got to talk about it. If we don't, no, we don't. But the lender is the one who's going to get you on that one.
Okay, so speaking of some legalized language, I want to explain what will happen in this determination letter that gets a lot of survivors confused and concerned, right? This last highlighted paragraph down here says, failure to purchase and maintain flood insurance may affect your eligibility for future FEMA assistance for flood damage, which we just discussed, right? Then it says, if you do not accept the requirements to purchase and maintain flood insurance, you must return all flood-related FEMA assistance awards within 30 days of the date of this letter. Now you think that and you're like, oh, I can't afford flood insurance. Does that mean I have to send every last penny back to FEMA? Now, I have spoken to flood mitigation specialists. I've spoken to everyone under the sun in FEMA, I feel like, about this, just to confirm. This means if you, as the seller, do not want to have that flood insurance requirement placed on your property for any future selling, you can return every last penny you have received from FEMA. And FEMA could erase that NFIP requirement. However, I have met people who've done that and it still didn't happen. So my recommendation is accept the FEMA funds that you've been provided, use them for the repair and replacement of your property and home, and understand that if you do not have flood insurance in the next flood-related disaster, FEMA will not assist you. Questions on that? All righty.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have to buy the flood insurance through FEMA?
Do you have to buy the flood insurance through FEMA? You can buy the flood insurance from whomever you like. What happens is, like you can see in this, in this image right here, it says EHRZ. It's a little code, right? It means that this survivor was denied an SBA loan, and it means that the survivor might be eligible for group flood insurance, right? The survivor, if they were eligible, this survivor actually was, received a letter after this letter saying, you've been eligible for group flood insurance. So it has to be an eligibility, and the survivor has to have been denied an SBA loan or not even referred over to the SBA in order to even qualify for the potential assistance of group flood insurance. So if you were denied an SBA loan, or if you were not even requested to apply for an SBA loan, and you have this flood insurance requirement placed on your home, there is a greater likelihood that you'll be approved group flood insurance from FEMA for up to 3 years. Yeah. After that time, it is your responsibility to maintain that flood insurance because FEMA will not continue the coverage. And those monies come out of the other needs assistance bucket, right? So there was a whole list of items under other needs assistance, and you have up to $41,000 in other needs assistance. And group flood insurance is covered out of that.
So you might get to this later, but question. If FEMA doesn't itemize what the funding is for, how do you know if you have a duplication of funds for specific items?
So when you got to reach out to FEMA, contact their helpline, ask for a tier 2 representative, go through your case file, or request your complete case file to be mailed to you. It can be, I've seen them up to like 300 pages, and you gotta and a lot of it's just unnecessary things that aren't even pertaining to you, right? But you'll get to the meat of it, right, and see what you're eligible for. Okay, let's talk about the appeal letter itself. All right? So you need to format it in a certain way to really make sure that it doesn't get lost in the shuffle. Now remember, there are multiple disasters that are going on. Hundreds of thousands of people applying to FEMA, appealing FEMA, right? From across multiple disasters, multiple areas. So it's very important that you put key pieces of information on every page of your appeal so that, especially if you fax your appeal, everything will be compiled back to the way it is. You can imagine a fax room with multiple appeals coming in, right? And not a lot of manpower inside that fax room and pages everywhere. And then people coming in and picking up pages and trying to put them back together and scan them into the system. So you want to have this vital information, which is the applicant's name, whether it's the registrant or the co-registrant. You want the FEMA registration number. It's a 9-digit number. Needs to be included. You want the last 4 of the survivor's social security number. You want the name of the disaster. It's helpful to have the name of the disaster and the FEMA disaster code. Super important. And then the date of the appeal, right? You want that on every page of your appeal. Now, the letter itself, you want to have short and sweet, but all supplemental material that's attached to it be as complete as possible. Robin, you got something?
In addition to all of that, on every single page, it's really also very helpful. Thank you. If you say page 1 of 20, page 2 of 20, and if you're faxing it, because of the Privacy Act of 1974,
Yep.
You should also include the privacy cover sheet. That also helps the people that walk by the fax machine to pick it up, to know that, oh, there's a cover sheet. That's the beginning of a new series of documents, and it helps them break it up.
Yeah, every fax that we send always has a cover page. So make sure you have that cover page and have 2 FEMA individual assistance and household programs written on there and from the name of the survivor. Yes, sir.
Online?
Yeah, there's an online way you can do that, but you have to create your own profile on disasterassistance.gov. And right now, what's happened is the government has tried to have just one login, right? So before you create a disasterassistance.gov account, you need to go to login.gov. Login.gov and create a login. And this will allow you to have one login for SBA and for FEMA and for a few others, I don't even know. So very important to get that login, then go into disasterassistance.gov, create a profile, and then upload your appeal. Now we're going to state this later, but when you upload your appeal or you fax your appeal, do not send one page after another. It all has to be one file. Now what happens is you guys have a survivor and you're the case manager of that survivor, right? You have all the information, et cetera, et cetera. That's not how it works in FEMA's system. It's whoever's available type of thing, right? So my case, I could have submitted an appeal and it'll go to Robin, right, to look at. Yet I send another appeal in and it'll go to Angela, right? So it's not going to go to the same person. So if you submit just one page after another page after another page, you can imagine how each page goes to a different agent and it's all going to be confusing and then it's going to take forever for anything to be processed. So when on disasterassistance.gov, make sure it's one file. You might have to compress it because it's a maximum of 10 megabits. So you might have to compress the file before uploading it. And again, I cannot restate this enough. Do not send in photos. Do not send in photos because especially when faxing, it's very grainy, it's black and white. When FEMA scans it back into their system, it's even worse, then it's harder and messes everything up. Don't send in photos. Okay, so you have these items right here, put everything into context. Who you are, what to look for. Then we're going to go to the letter itself. This is just a blanket example letter, right? But what I want to point out to you is that I'm stating what I'm appealing. So I'm appealing home repair assistance. That's what I'm appealing, right? Identifying whether or not I had homeowner's insurance. Now let's say I did have homeowner's insurance. Say I had homeowner's insurance at the time of the disaster. I did not have flood insurance at the time of the disaster. I have attached a settlement statement from my homeowner's insurance or a denial letter from my homeowner's insurance. You know, like identify what is there. Now, this is a home repair appeal. So we want to prove that there were damages to the home. And to do that, we'll want to include contractor estimates. So we identify, I have contractor estimates showing a cost of repairs being X amount of dollars, right? Which is greater than the X amount of dollars that FEMA has given me. So you identify what you are wanting, and then you ask, please consider me for this. You know, tell FEMA what you are wanting, right? Now this is, again, we kept it so simple here that it was just a little brief thing. Our appeals are a little bit longer, but we try to keep them one page. What I want you to make sure is that you eliminate the fluff of it all, right? I know survivors who write their own appeals and they say, I've lived in this home for 25 years. It was, you know, my childhood home and blah, blah, blah. FEMA doesn't care. They don't have the time, they don't have the bandwidth to read that, right? They want to know what the meat of the request is. And how are you proving that this is what you're requesting and that this is accurate, right? Now, the only thing off of this letter that has to be written letter for letter is the self-declaring statement, which says, I hereby declare under penalty of perjury that the foregoing is true and correct. If you do not have that self-certifying or declaring statement, binding statement, written on this appeal letter, you need to get it notarized. And if you have neither a notary, which is expensive, or this statement, FEMA will not look at it. So it has to be written on that letter. Doesn't matter where it's located, has to be in there, clear as day, okay? Then you need to sign it, or the survivor, you as a survivor need to sign it, and provide additional information to help FEMA. Always helpful. Be as helpful as you can be with FEMA, right? Write your name, your address, your date of birth, city and state of where you were born, whatever helps keep things in context. Now, this signature can be the primary registrant or the co-registrant, right? Or if there's someone with a power of attorney, it could be that power of attorney. But in order for that to happen, you also need to have that power of attorney authorization included in the appeal and stated in the letter. And generally that should be something that FEMA's already aware of, but if not, make sure that's included in that appeal, okay, and include that authorization. Then you want to list out what attachments you're including, all those items that are substantiating your claims. While the letter itself is short, sweet, to the point, you want to make sure your attachments are as detailed as possible to prove what is written in that letter. So if you have, you're helping with hotel reimbursement, you want to make sure that you have receipts from the hotel, dates written on there, the location of the hotel, contact information for the hotel, all the things that could really help FEMA identify, right? So all the attachments that can help substantiate the letter. Now, accuracy, vital. When we're helping our survivors with appeals, we always have second eyes. So I have a team of associates and some managers, and the managers are always the second eyes of these appeals, just to make sure that there were no spelling errors, that all the vital documentation, like the registration number, the date of birth, and things like that are all written correctly. There wasn't a mistake. And then you want to make sure that everything is accurate. Now I'm going to tell you a story about Louisiana. I worked with a survivor in Louisiana who got married a week before Hurricane Ida hit. Okay. And then she was living in heirs property home that had never been properly passed down to the heirs, right? And she applied for FEMA, and FEMA denied her. So we had a lot of things we had to do at this point. She and her siblings decided to do succession on the home. And by the time she did that, she had changed legally from her maiden name to her married name. But when she applied to FEMA, she applied with her maiden name because it was 1 week before the disasters when she got married. Right? And when they did the succession papers, it was in her married name. So we had a lot to work with here at this appeal. So we had to identify that she was who she says she was. So we included her birth certificate. We also had to include her marriage certificate, identifying her new name. We had to include the succession papers. We also had to identify in the succession papers, because she was the only one of the children that were living at that address, that she was living at that address. So we had included proof of occupancy as well, right? Because now we had the ownership written there, but we needed the occupancy. So it's a whole list of things we needed for her. She got the money from FEMA. But you have to really take into account the whole big picture and include everything inside that appeal that will be required for FEMA to accurately understand what's going on so they can provide sufficient funds. Okay, I already stated this, but when submitting on a disasterassistance.gov, submit as one file only, max 10 megabits, so you might need to compress the file. If you don't know how to do it, I'm sure there's a young kid that you know who can help you with that. And do not submit photos. Again, photos are really important, especially when you have inspectors coming by. You can show them the before and after. But another reason why FEMA doesn't like photos is because they can't verify if it's your address in that photo or your home, right? So keep the photos for people who come to you in person, but do not submit them to FEMA. Okay, now I showed you the basic overview of the appeal. Now we're going to go into types of appeals, because you're not going to want to request a home repair appeal and personal property appeal and transportation appeal all in one appeal, right? They're separate items. So you got to send separate appeals. Yeah, I know. Oh my goodness is right. It's a lot, right? So for housing assistance, what FEMA can help with is written right here. Structurally, it's foundation, exterior walls, roof, mold remediation, windows, doors, floors, walls, ceilings, cabinetry, your HVAC system, your septic, plumbing, electrical, access, blocking, leveling, and anchoring of the home. If your home, the structure of the home was not damaged or access was not impeded, FEMA is not going to assist. If it was a landslide that came right up to your door, but it didn't hurt your house, FEMA's not going to assist with the land and retaining walls and things like that. It has to also be essential rooms. So if it's a shed out back, FEMA's not going to fix that, right? Or if it is in Florida, they have something called a lanai, right? Which is kind of the green room area, you know, like your sun porch, pool area. FEMA's not going to assist that. These are essential living quarters, okay? Now, when, like I stated, when you have a home repair appeal, you want to include contractor estimates. This is an example contractor estimate. This is using a tool called Xactimate. Don't need to have Xactimate, to be able to submit these estimates. But there are a few key things that are super important. One being, the contractor needs to have a cover page with the client's information, name and address, damaged dwelling address written on there, right? You need the contractor's contact information because FEMA will call that contractor to verify the estimates. Additionally, please make sure the contractor knows that FEMA is going to call them, because if FEMA tries calling and the contractor never responds, and FEMA's going to try again 3 times, nothing's going to move forward and that appeal's going to be denied, right? So the contractor needs to know. And then it's also very, 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 very important to have the contractor identify that all of the damages listed inside this estimate was directly related to and caused by the disaster. Okay? Now, we have to avoid deferred maintenance and no cosmetic things. These are really estimates specifically related to FEMA and not for actual repairs of the home to bring it back to that pre-disaster condition, right? So those are the 3 things that are very important on the cover page. And then you want a breakdown, line item breakdown per room of what the damages are, and then the exterior of the home, right? Or roof, or like under the flooring. So has to be broken out. And then the total. Okay? Include that in the appeal. That'll help FEMA agents understand the extent of damage to the home. What FEMA inspectors do is they do something called a damage level assessment. And they do these damage levels between 0 to 5. Okay? And it's based off of certain metrics. And you can have a FEMA inspector come inside the house and say, oh, it's a damage level 1, when in reality, it should be a damage level 3. And through your contractor estimates, you can help substantiate and prove that your home is actually a higher damage level than what the inspector stated. So very important to have these contractor estimates. Okay, so that's home repair appeal. Now you have personal property appeal. Now, personal property appeal is for essential items. The items that are of most worth to you will never be covered by FEMA. Your dad's record collection, your mom's china, none of that is going to be covered, right? It's major appliances. If by any chance you lost every last bit of clothing on your back, the whole fire consumed everything, you may qualify for some clothing. Basic room furnishings, sofa, bed, dresser, all those essential items. And any essential tools. So let's say you have even school-age kids who require a tablet, and the school doesn't cover it, but it's needed for school, and it was damaged. FEMA could potentially cover the cost of that. Or if you are someone who has, your source of income comes from different tools that you have, FEMA could help with that as well. Valerie.
Yeah, so,
No problem.
thank you. First up, so for manufactured homes, those, the HVAC system and those pieces are actually considered contents, not part of the dwelling. So how does that work with FEMA? Are they just saying it's here even though it doesn't work that way with like insurance and things, or is it different?
FEMA considers HVAC as a home, part of the home repair appeal. Mm-hmm. Robin, do you want to add something to that?
No, there's funding available for that as well.
That's right, Oregon, yes.
Yes, Oregon.
Yes.
On how long does it take, not necessarily reimbursement, but how long does it take to get money such as you lose all your clothes? How does that come about?
So he asked, how much time does it take to get money, especially like for your clothes? So there are some disasters, and this is something I failed to state, so I apologize, but I'm glad you brought up this question. There are some disasters which provide something called critical needs assistance. Critical needs assistance is a lump sum of money, currently it's $700, that is provided to survivors who need, who have critical needs, who have those immediate needs. Say, they were without power for the 5 days, like Robin had stated, and they lost all the food, and maybe even some pills, whatever it is, that needs to be refrigerated. In the application, there's a question that asks if you have any critical needs. Now, my suggestion to you is this. Apply to FEMA as quickly as possible, if possible within the first 15 days of the FEMA application window, and check this, because it's kind of when the money runs dry, it runs dry, and it is not appealable. Okay, and I guarantee you're going to hear from your neighbors, people saying, well, my neighbor got $700, but I didn't get it, and why didn't I get it? It's because they might not have applied to FEMA as quickly as possible, and they might not have checked a box that says I have immediate needs. So that's when they're going to receive the quickest amount of funds for that. Otherwise, like this, the clothing, it could be a long time. Because if you are immediately denied assistance from FEMA for other needs, or you are referred over to the SBA, it's going to take you a while with the SBA. Then you got to wait for a FEMA determination. Then you might have to appeal. So it could take a long time.
It could also, if everything runs smoothly.
Oh, can you grab the microphone? Yeah.
It could be 3 to 10 days as well after you register before you've received funding from FEMA. If everything in your application went well, yes, you might also get a declination letter for ONA, but you might get initial funding for the repair of your home, your dwelling. So 3 to 10 days could be the soonest that you could receive funding.
Yeah, and we've, even when we've done appeals, we've seen appeals that have had a super quick turnaround like that. So there's no rhyme or reason to it, to be honest. It's just, yeah. But again, FEMA is very quick to say we are not a substitute for any other sources of assistance. So that's when that community volunteer assistance is super vital. And so when there are people who can help, provide clothing donation, that's where we have to rely as well. Now, when you're doing a personal property appeal, FEMA wants to know what the price was of what you've paid for your items. The way we at SBP do it is just a little bit different. We have found really common low-grade items, sofa, a two-seater sofa, a three-seater sofa, mid-grade washer and dryer from Lowe's and Walmart. So we have basic idea of what those repair costs would be, or replacement costs would be, excuse me. So we itemize what has been damaged or completely destroyed by the disaster. Here's another very important thing. When you have major appliances, FEMA wants to know whether it was repairable or it has to be replaced. And FEMA will supply with 2 different award amounts based off of that. So if FEMA thinks that the items can be repaired, the award amount that the survivor receives is going to be less than if they have to be replaced. So if the appliances are not repairable, please make it abundantly clear that they are not repairable. And it is very important too to try to get contractor estimates on those appliances, right? You don't need contractor estimates on sofas and beds and things, but on those major appliances, you do. So have that list out and identify what the cost of repair or replacement will be. So that was personal property. Next is transportation. Even with other needs assistance, we send separate appeals, right? Because they're separate kind of subjects, right? So with transportation, FEMA could provide up to $6,000 for vehicle repair or replacement. In order to be eligible for that, you have to have a valid registration, which in most every single state, including this one, means you have to at minimum have liability insurance. So in order for FEMA assistance, you have to at minimum have liability insurance in California. Generally, FEMA will cover 1 vehicle per household. If there are really extenuating circumstances in which you have to have more than 1 vehicle, FEMA may provide additional funding, but that's up to FEMA. Just like everything else, you need mechanics estimates identifying what the extent of damage is to the vehicle, and this is vital, identifying that the damages occurred due to the disaster. You're going to have many mechanics who are going to say, well, I don't know if it was. So that's the tricky thing there. Okay, you got to navigate that some way, somehow. But again, you're going to have an appeal letter. Then you're going to send in a copy of the registration, copy of the liability insurance, copy of the mechanics estimates, all in one appeal, right?
As one document.
As one packet, yes, exactly. Additionally, we at SBP assist the survivor. So we have something that we use as a release of information form. FEMA has release of information forms that they can supply. It's very important in order for you as the advocate to communicate with FEMA to have that release of information form signed by the survivor. Otherwise, FEMA will not talk to you whatsoever, because just like that privacy thing that we've been talking about, you have not been granted the ability to go inside that survivor's case file and get any information whatsoever. Okay, rental assistance. We're nearing the end, guys. Thanks for bearing with me. So rental assistance, again, we stated it's every 2 months, right? Is the possibility, but you got to stay engaged in this. So if you say your home is not safe to occupy and you are willing to relocate, FEMA could potentially provide you with up to 2 months worth of rent. After 1 month, they'll send you a continued temporary housing assistance form. Looks like this. It's a form that the survivor is going to fill out. You might need to help them. And included with it, you want to make sure you have your temporary rental receipts or temporary lease agreement. You want to have utility bills. If you're still paying a mortgage on your home, you want to include that. And include any utilities that you're paying on your home. Pay stubs, whatever income you're receiving, they might want to see that. You know, you want to supply them with as much information as possible to help them understand that you actually need this assistance. And again, remember, this is every 2 months that you have to do this in order to qualify for an additional 2 months worth of assistance. If you are moving, I'll be right there. If you are moving around, please remember, update FEMA with your current mailing address, because if you don't get that CTHA form, or if you don't have a online profile to get it, you're going to miss out on the opportunity. Go ahead.
I was just wondering if the forms are available in multiple languages.
I don't know. Robin, is that an answer?
I don't know.
Yeah, she doesn't know.
We'll check and get back to you, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and there's indigenous languages spoken in our current disasters that are not written, so they would like Mixteco and Kiki, so you'd have to have someone.
You need a translator.
definitely have to have someone helping you fill it out, because, yeah.
Listen, my recommendation on that form, the CTHA, is have somebody help you anyway. It is very complicated. It is not meant to be easy. I don't know why. It's the federal government.
Not your fault.
Not my fault.
Yeah.
What happens, and who do you turn to if you have to pay rent while you're in potentially temporary housing?
So, like, if you're a renter and you still have to pay your, what is it called now? Not a landlord, what is it?
It's property provider.
Your property provider. When you still have to pay your property provider, yeah, you supply that to FEMA too. Like you supply what you're paying rent on in your damaged dwelling, and also supply receipts of what you're paying for your temporary housing. Yeah. If FEMA says, after you fill out the CTHA form, says, no, you're no longer qualified and you don't agree with that, then you can appeal with an appeal letter. Send all the documents again, right? Just explain. So the moral of this story, you guys, that I've stated over the past many hours, again, thanks for bearing with me, is don't give up, A, definitely appeal, B, and you may need to appeal more than once, and contact FEMA, ask for Tier 2, get as much information on your case file as you possibly can.
How many times can you appeal on a specific?
So FEMA will send an inspector out to your home up to 3 times. That's it. However, appeal until, you know, like the water runs dry, right?
I mean, we do say 3 times for the same item. 3 times for the same item. Rental assistance, you're gonna appeal. 3 times. No. Appeal again. Change the language. Provide additional documentation. Appeal again. Keep
Yeah, and
calling.
what Robin just stated of change the language, that is so important. Don't send the same thing over and over again because you're just going to be denied every time. Make sure that you change the language up. Provide more details, more clarification, additional documentation. Yeah, don't give up, guys. Keep going.
The last piece of things that you need, we're giving listing, get a disaster case manager, because they will help you with that.
Case managers are great. Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess I'll ask, are there a list of buzzwords that seem to elicit the proper response?
I mean,
Not
if
for
you,
everything else.
yeah, so if you, Joe's boss likes to say, fight policy with policy. Okay? So if you know what FEMA's policy is and you use those key words, then it's much more likely that you'll be heard. FEMA loves the words also safe, sanitary, and functional. So if you say, I need funds to repair my home, that's open up to interpretation, right? But if you say, I need funds to bring my home back to a safe, sanitary, and functional condition, that helps FEMA know that you're only going to use the funds for that and not to bring it back to that pre-disaster condition, right? Was there another question?
My concern is that is all call from the victim or the survivor, my question would really be, what about the person who's reading it? What's their competency? Can they really understand this, and how many levels? You've already used tier 1. You've already used tier 2. Where do we go? How do we escalate it?
So this is where you're in luck with people not being your case manager within FEMA, and why you need to appeal multiple times, because you might find someone a little more competent and a little more education than the last person who takes over the case file. Yeah. Now, disasters are occurring at an ever rapid rate, and FEMA's hiring a lot, and there are times when FEMA doesn't have the opportunity to train people up as much as they would otherwise like to, and that, unfortunately, is to the detriment of the survivor. But when you continue to appeal, you have a greater chance of getting your appeal in the hands of someone who is well educated and very competent in understanding what the actual damage level is and providing sufficient funding.
And if you're, I was gonna say, and if you're helping survivors, download from FEMA.gov, the IAPPG.
It's the Individual Program
Assistance
Policy and
Program.
Assistance Guide.
Yeah. And read through that, because it explains every detail in our language that I would encourage you to copy and use in all of your appeals.
It is 300 pages long, and if you thought this was dry, that's even drier. But go to Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is the Individual Household Assistance Program, and pretty much all the information is in Chapter 3.
Use that Control F function when you're on
Yeah.
Adobe.
And another question then, because I know the Public Assistance Program and Policy Guide has been updated 3 times since the last time that we had a major fire, and so does the IA also do that?
Yes.
And so the one that is going to apply to that event
I think
has
it's
to be
from,
the one that was in place when the event occurred.
so I think the last time they updated the IAPPG was May of 21. That's the last time they updated
So
it,
if they
from my
change
knowledge.
that policy,
And we are,
Yeah.
and it's in revision now. I haven't seen it yet. But that is why it's so important to know where to find the information about our program, because it's always changing. We get a new administrator, we get a new president, lots of things change.
Yeah, I really appreciate all of your comments today, guys. I hope, oh, another one. Go right ahead.
Very quick, how does FEMA treat the situation of the rent-to-own resident?
Yeah, that one's really hard too. We've been highly unsuccessful in making headway there, because it is the owner is not the person living in the home, because even though they're a rent-to-own situation, they still do not own that home legally, and so they are still considered as a renter. Yeah, unfortunately. Other questions? Yes.
Is there any nonprofits that can help the community with these complicated forms other than FEMA?
Yeah, so you have disaster legal aids, who, if a survivor qualifies for legal aid assistance, could receive that assistance. I would say us, the SBP, however, we are not out here right now. But if you're in any other disaster location, give me a ring.
Our disaster case.
And
managers
disaster case managers.
In California, usually is through Catholic Charities in their local office. So disaster case managers are key, and we have DLEC, the Disaster Legal Assistance Collaborative. It's out of Alameda, but it's an 800 number. And then a lot of our local legal services programs or legal aid programs are pro bono nonprofits. They will also help with those appeals, especially up north where we've had all the fires.
And then when we get into the long-term recovery groups in the local jurisdiction, then there will be both national and local nonprofits that will do case management for that, for the disaster.
Where do you
For
find that,
years.
where do you find the list?
Well, if you've applied, then they know to contact you to offer assistance.
You could always contact me or
Your local BOAD, that's me.
That would be Marcia, yes.
Okay, I'll get that information.
Other questions? All right, well, hopefully this was helpful, a little bit insightful. Here are some key numbers and things to jot down or take picture of. One is the FEMA helpline number, 800-621-3362. We love United Policyholders, Valerie over there, for people with homeowners insurance who are really struggling with their homeowners insurance and getting a settlement. Slew of resources on their website, or you can email them. There's no phone number though.
No.
They don't want phone calls, guys. only emails. If you go on to Disaster Legal Aid, there is a sidebar that has different states, and it'll have a whole list of partner pro bono attorneys who collaborate with Disaster Legal Aid. While SBP is not out here, you can always feel free to email me if you have a tricky situation at this email, FEMAhelp@sbpusa.org, and I can help you walk through some things. Just reference my name, okay? Because I have a couple managers who look inside that email. But also, I could just give you my card too if you guys want my card.